So I recently just got a brand new coffee from Hatchet Coffee Roasters, which is a roaster that's pretty local to me here. It's only 10 days off roast, but I got really impatient today and decided to go ahead and try it. So I'm gonna walk you through the process of how I approach that first cup from a new bag. So the first thing to really pay attention to is the tasting notes. This is probably the reason that you bought the bag of coffee, or at least a big part of the reason, is that it looked like something you would enjoy from the notes that the roaster gave you. In this case, the notes are green apple, candy, and pineapple soda. What that tells me right off the bat is that we can probably expect some acidity out of this coffee, some malic acidity, which is like the acidity that you get from an apple. Seeing that, I went ahead and decided to brew the first cup in a flat bottom brewer. Flat bottom brewers typically bring out more body, more sweetness, and they mute acidity typically. So I'm someone who doesn't enjoy super hyper acidic coffee. I definitely enjoy acidity, but I was wanting to possibly tame that a little bit. The next thing to look at, and arguably just as important, is the process and the origin of the coffee. So in this case, this is a Colombian coffee that was produced by John Rodriguez. It is an advanced wash process. In this case, they wash the coffee and then co-ferment the coffee with tropical fruits and selected yeast. So seeing this, anytime you see any sort of co-fermentation or anaerobic fermentation, anything that's a little bit more process forward, you are gonna probably want to grind a little coarser, maybe use a little bit of lower water temp, do some things that are not gonna push your extraction quite as high, just because these coffees tend to taste more pleasant, usually at lower extractions. That's not always the case, however, that's usually a good place to start. Also, looking at the origin and the varietal of the coffee, this is a Papaya variety, or Papaya, I don't know if I'm saying that correctly. I don't believe I've tried many coffees of this variety that I remember, so I'm going in a little bit blindly in that case, but there are certain origins and certain varieties that are definitely gonna brew very differently. So coffees from Ethiopia, for instance, typically produce a lot more fines when you grind them, so you might find yourself grinding coarser or maybe using less pores in your recipe. For this bag, I am keeping my grind fairly coarse. We're staying at 27 clicks on my Comandante, which is where it lives most of the time. So in most cases, I recommend picking a grind size that works well for the paper filters that you're using and your pour method, and sticking to that and only tweaking after you've tried the coffee. For the recipe, I did 12 grams of coffee to about 190 grams of water. I recommend starting with anywhere between a 1 to 15 ratio to a 1 to 17 ratio, really depending on what your preferences are. I've been experimenting a little bit more with those shorter ratios, closer to 1:15, and have had some really good results that I enjoy. I do enjoy my coffee a little bit stronger, a little bit punchier, and I feel like those ratios are definitely getting me there right now. For this coffee, I stuck with a single bloom of about 2 to 3 times the weight of the coffee, and then a single pour right up to our target weight. Pouring fairly easy and just hovering not very far above the coffee bed, not trying to introduce too much agitation here. As mentioned before, with really heavily processed coffees like this that are more funky and processed forward, I tend to try to extract less. I'm also brewing with my water right at about 200 degrees Fahrenheit. You could definitely go a little bit lower with a coffee like this and probably still have great results. You could definitely even push it a little bit higher. 200 to 205 is usually my starting point for most brews. So while I was brewing this, I did get a slight vegetal aroma on the nose, which could be a sign that this coffee is not quite rested enough, and that was one thing I was worried about. However, tasting the coffee, really the first thing that hits you is that green apple candy note. You really didn't even have to search for that. It was just immediately there. Very sweet and very nice tart acidity, and even some pleasant sourness. There was, however, just a little bit of that vegetal taste that I also caught in the aroma, which is a sign that I probably need to rest this coffee longer. The pineapple soda note didn't come through quite as strong as I was hoping. And the pineapple that I was tasting almost felt like a little bit of an underripe pineapple in a way, which kind of blended with that vegetal note, like a little bit of underripe fruit. Again, I do believe resting this coffee longer is simply the answer there. Heavier processed coffees like this do need a little bit more rest time typically, a little bit more time to degas. So after I brew the first cup of a new bag like this, I like to make a list of things that I really enjoyed and things that I might want to tweak for the next batch. So first things first, I do think I want to try a stronger ratio next time. The coffee did feel a little bit weak and maybe a little light in body, and hopefully shortening that ratio up just a tad will, I don't know, make it a little more punchy, a little more juicy, which is something I'd really like to pull out of this coffee. The next thing I'd like to do is probably try this in a V60. Usually I do start my coffees in the V60, however, seeing that green apple note, I did decide to start with the Oreo this time. However, I think that the acidity that we get from a V60 or any other conical brewer for that matter is going to probably highlight that green apple flavor in a way that I think would be really pleasant. This coffee was definitely not too acidic. And lastly, the number one thing that is going to help this coffee is letting it rest longer. 10 days just wasn't enough. I kind of knew it wouldn't be going in, but I was just so excited that I just couldn't wait any longer. So I'm probably going to give this coffee about, I don't know, 5 to 7 days before I try it again. It's going to be hard, but I do want to make sure I get the most out of this bag, and hopefully this video has helped you get the most out of your bags as well. And yeah, goodbye.